6 months. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we spend the hour with a man who put his life on the line at least twice, once when he served in Vietnam, and again when he came back. It was September 1st, 1987. Brian Willson took part in a nonviolent action outside the Concord Naval Weapons Station in California. He sat down on the train tracks along with 2 other veterans, trying to stop a U.S. government munitions train from sending weapons to Central America. The train did not stop. Willson lost both of his legs. Well, Brian Willson joins us in our studio. He came to us yesterday. He's traveling the country, visiting Occupy sites, where some of his fellow protesters are also veterans. He's also been talking about his new memoir, Blood on the Tracks, The Life and Times of S. Brian Willson. On the West Coast, Brian completed much of the tour on his hand cycle. Now he's on the East Coast. I started by asking him exactly what happened on that day in September 1987 when he was carrying out this act of peaceful resistance on the train tracks outside Concord Naval Weapons Station in California.
It was a Tuesday, September 1st, 1987, and of course it was planned by me in advance after spending much time in Nicaragua and El Salvador witnessing the carnage of U.S. policy.
What was happening then there? In Nicaragua and El Salvador? Well, of course, President
Reagan was had his war of terror on what he called the terrorists in revolutionary Nicaragua that was had overthrown Somoza, and the revolutionary process in El Salvador trying to oust a very repressive feudalistic government. And so Reagan declared there was a Soviet beachhead being formed in Latin America, which of course we all know is absurd, just another excuse for putting down self-determination processes in other countries. So we knew the weapons were coming from the Concord, California Naval Weapons Station, 35 miles east of San Francisco, and we decided to go there after many efforts of trying to get Congress to stop the funding. This whole process of petitioning Congress, which is known pretty much an oligarchic institution representing corporations, we decided we would directly try to obstruct the flow of the munitions that move on trucks and trains at Concord to the ships in Sacramento River. And so it's a 3-mile track from the bunkers to the ship. It crosses a public right-of-way, highway, and that's where we were vigiling. We have been vigiling for 3 months. Many arrests had taken place. I had only been a jail support person, and I decided on September 1st, 1987, which was an anniversary of the Veterans Fast for Life of the year before on the steps of the Capitol, that 2 vets and I would do a 40-day water-only fast between the rails to obstruct, at least temporarily, the movement of the train. So I had watched these trains move all summer with flatbed cars full of crates of white phosphorus rockets, 500-pound bombs, mortars, millions of rounds of ammunition, and it was just getting to the point where I said I have to at least escalate my own nonviolent occupation, if you will, of the tracks. And we told the base what we were doing, why we were doing it, when we were going to do it, and asked for a meeting with the commander, and he refused. So at 10 of 12 on September 1st, the 2 other vets and I took our position on the rails, starting our 40-day water-only fast, knowing we would probably spend much of that in jail. There was a big sign next to our vigil that said, "Penalty for blocking federal munitions trains is 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine." So we knew what the consequences were. I actually, and the first train was coming just before noon, first train that day. And the next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital 4 days later. I have no memory of what happened. Of course, I had 40 friends that were witnessing, and the other 2 veterans just barely got out of the way. The train was speeding The FBI, in looking at the one video, said the train was accelerating to more than 3 times its 5-mile-an-hour speed limit at the point of impact. We found out later that the train crew that day had been ordered not to stop the train, which was an unprecedented, basically an illegal order. Why? Because they said I was going to hijack the train, which of course there were 350 armed Marines to protect the base. There was usually local police present when we were present on the tracks. I had never envisioned it being a dangerous action. And then while I was in the hospital, an FBI agent was fired, and after almost 22 years, he was fired for refusing to investigate me and 3 other veterans as domestic terrorist suspects. So this was all shocking to me. Just shocking that I, this all-American kid that grew up in upstate New York, even though I kind of shifted after Vietnam to being a dissenter, or my father would just say a marginal person, I just never imagined this happening. Of course, this government will do anything, we know that, but I would imagine it doing it to people in other countries, but not to me in this country. So it was a very interesting experience.
When you woke up in the hospital 4 days later, what did you understand happened?
Well, initially, I saw a lot of plants at the base of my bed, green plants, and my partner at the time was sitting next to me, and I blurted out well, this is what I remember, my first words. Wow, I'm in a jail cell with plants, and my family is next to the bed? And my family explained to me, honey, you are in a hospital, you got hit by the train, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And then I was watching the replay on the wall television for several days. They were playing it on the news, and I was watching myself be run over by the train, and it was like, well, this is what happens to people, of course, all over the world who obstruct the Yankee mad train that's trying to repress people who want to have self-determination or what have you. So it was just another part of the U.S. policy coming home very personally to me, viscerally. And but the day I woke up, 9,000 people showed up at the tracks and ripped up 300 feet of the tracks and stacked up the railroad ties in a very interesting sculpture. And from that day on, for 28 consecutive months, day and night, 24 hours a day, there was a permanent occupation in the tracks of sometimes 200 people with tents blocking every train and every truck. 2,100 people arrested. 3 people had their arms broken by the police. This was all 24 years ago. Occupation of the tracks, the police were abusive. However, the trains, of course, did stop after that. It's just that they had to stop and wait for massive numbers of arrests. And
what did you understand then as you watched the video of yourself and the train rolling over you? As it rolled over you, it sliced off both your legs?
It sliced off one of my legs and mangled the other one. I had a huge skull fracture. In fact, I have a plate in my skull right here. A piece of my skull the size of a lemon was completely dislodged from my skull and driven into and destroyed my right frontal lobe, which is why the doctors were concerned that I might die in the operating room.
Brian Willson telling his story, September 1st, 1987, telling us today as he talks about his memoir, Blood on the Tracks, The Life and Times of S. Brian Willson. We'll be back with him in a minute.